next paper is about innovation processes, but she is not an economist, so most of us probably will learn something useful. Dr. Gemma Cornelio will present the paper Co-Creation and Participation as a Means of Innovation in New Media, an analysis of creativity in the photographic field.
I will introduce this paper also on behalf of my colleague Edgar Gomez, who is working right now at the University of Leeds. But as I will explain, in the context of an origin of this paper, he was working here. He was doing his PhD project, being supervised by Elisenda Ardebo, and he was also part of the research project that it's the context of this presentation. So, firstly, this paper is the result of putting together two different interests. Firstly, was my own personal interest in theorizing the notion of co-creation, specifically in the field of new media, as part of this project. And that was, the origin was in 2011, and I was kind of obsessed of having this neutral or objective definition of co-creation. Now I realize that it wasn't so important, but at that moment I thought so. So that was on the one hand, and on the other, we had the work that Edgar had done in his PhD project that was an ethnographic research on a collective of photographers in Barcelona, but that were sharing experiences, pictures in Flickr. And this was part also of the project, as we considered this collective could be potentially or actually a co-creative process. And thirdly, we wanted to add a third layer to the project, introducing the notions of innovation and creativity in this theorization. So this is a very theoretical paper. I'm sorry about that. Maybe it's not so aligned with other presentations, but it's a kind of theoretical encounters. And firstly, of course, we were looking at definitions of co-creation, highlighting some ideas like the fact that consumers are being participative, making and circulating media content. It is important to know that the users are contributed in a non-trivial way, so what users are doing in these media co-creative projects is relevant. In the definition by Banks and Potts, co-creation is oriented to innovation, and it's also defined as a co-evolutionary model related to situated creativity with different degrees of participation. And we wanted to add and highlight the idea that there's always an implicit or explicit relationship between industries and external agents. We call them like, it can be fans, amateurs, artists, or whatever, collaborating in industrial projects in some cases. So this general framework, as a result, gave us two different main approaches to co-creation. The first one is the industry-oriented ones, or co-creation projects fostered by industries, aiming at having publics collaborating with them. And the other one is the co-creation led by users, or we call them emergent or non-directive initiatives, which are mostly collective initiatives of making projects, creative projects. And we take the case of Edgar in this framework, and we ask if these photographic communities could be considered a non-directive approach to co-creation, and if that was the case, which was the role of industry in this case. So the second theoretical encounters were when we wanted to add the focus or the view on creativity in co-creation, because the previous approaches were focused mainly on the collective aspects of co-creation projects. Users collaborating with them, users collaborating with industries, but where was creativity in that? So we thought that introducing theories of creativity in this frame could illuminate some aspects, and some of the main authors in this field, like you could see, are the main features of them is that they do not consider creativity as an individual attribute, but maybe they look at creativity as a collective or systemic phenomenon, as we will see later. And on the other hand, we had the perspective of that Edgar was using in his fieldwork was coming from cultural theory and more specifically from the notion of field by Bourdieu. So then, this is a very synthetic extract of both concepts. So the notion of field is more focused on the tensions and relationships between different actors in a specific field. He used this to identify photography as a field, and the different tensions between, for instance, professionals and amateurs in the making and circulating pictures, and how they negotiate those aspects. And then Csikszentmihalyi describes creativity as the interaction of three subsystems he identifies them as the person, of course, the domain, which is quite similar to the notion of field by Bourdieu, but more centered in a discipline. For instance, in terms of Csikszentmihalyi, photography is also a domain. But then he introduces the field, which is mainly the actors that have powers of decision in one specific field. For instance, the fields are the gatekeepers, and gatekeepers are big companies or policymakers. And these gatekeepers are very important in order to introduce innovation or not in the field. So gatekeepers are the ones that let or not introduce innovations in a field. So okay, the encounter says that there were some connections between these two notions. Csikszentmihalyi connects creativity with innovation in the sense that you need to know the rules of a domain in order to be innovative. That means that if you want to innovate in the field of photography, you need to know how it works as a very complex system where there are some relationships between these gatekeepers, the creators, and also the field itself. So the gatekeepers are fundamental, so let's see what happens in the photographic field. I will go to this one, which is more specific. So which are these changes and innovation that Edgar found in his fieldwork? The first one is that professionals and amateurs are, this distinction is not so clear in the digital context, and many photographers that start as amateurs then become kind of semi-professionals or are competing in a way in this emergence of new markets that can be considered as semi-professional. So they sell their pictures, but not so expensive as professionals, but no free like an amateur. So there are also learning communities that emerging surrounding this phenomenon. There are also new actors that weren't in the previous well, before the digital photography, I mean, technological companies, stick memories. So that's very important because they weren't playing in the previous paradigm of photography, and these players are changing the rules. Then there's new circuits of sharing and exhibiting photographies, new photography identities. So what happened with gatekeepers in this, if we look to this in a systemic way, that gatekeepers fail to recognize the importance of these changes. For instance, Kodak was very relevant in the previous paradigm. They failed in not seeing these changes, so they were like, instead of producing digital cameras that they did after that, but initially they focused on digitization services and platforms that were unsuccessful. So these gatekeepers are not only to verify creativity, but to identify potential or actual innovations. So, okay, so that's the last conclusions. What we have seen in this trying to match the empirical findings and our theoretical discussions is that co-creation could be seen as a regarded set of non-directed creative practices, which are all these practices due with photographers in the context of platforms with the technological conditions of so on. So they are fostering alternative circuits of interchange and eventually introducing innovation and changes within a field. So these changes are due to the emergence of new actors that possess different capitals and meanings that had no previous participation in the field and gained presence and capital. So innovation can have a larger scope if we introduce a systemic look, which is introduced in this case by the notion of field or the idea of Csikszentmihalyi of creativity as a system. Co-creation and the transformation can be regarded through the lens of creativity theories, and that introduces also a change in displacing the focus from the creative subjects and the resulting objects to the processes and creative practices. And that's all.